know it. Yeah, you know it. I don't got it all planned out, but you know, I just watch it. You're man of your word. All things are possible when we believe. All chains are breakable when we receive your word. You keep your promises. If you said it, we believe it. If you said it, we believe it. Whoa. If you said it, we believe it. 'Cause you're a man of your word. If you said it, we believe it. Oh, 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 oh. If you said it, we believe it. 'Cause you're a man of your word. And all things are possible when we believe. And all chains are breakable when we receive your word. You keep your promises. If you said it, we believe it. If you said it, we believe it. If you said it, we believe it. 'Cause you're a man of your word. If you said it, we believe it. Oh, 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 oh. If you said it, we believe it. 'Cause you're a man of your word. We have this confidence. You finish what you started. God, you have never failed. You won't start with me. You're present in every step. You're patient in every heartache. God, you have never failed. You won't start with me. Whoa, oh, oh. Everybody rock like, hey, hey, yeah, hey. If you said it, we believe it. If you said it, we believe it. Oh, man of your word. If you said it, we believe it. Oh, 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 oh. If you said it, we believe it.
Glendale Academy, I hope you're doing well. Definitely miss seeing all of your faces, but I just wanted to say a big aloha from Long Beach. And with all that's going on in the world more than ever, it's important for us to understand what it means to live in community. One of the hardest things we are challenged with as a nation and as human beings really is to be able to have what's called civil discourse. Right now, the world is at odds. But my hope for you is that you engage with the world not treating others as enemies, but rather as human beings. Hopefully by that you can change the world. And in the process, hopefully you can teach us a thing or two about what it means to understand each other rather than fight each other all the time. So let's take a look at this text. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place. And suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as a fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. So I remember the day that I transferred into La Sierra, and I will never forget it because for one, I was super stressed from my transcripts not going through, and I moved to Southern California from Hawaii, not even knowing if I was accepted or not. Long story short, I moved out there to what some might call faith and some might just call dumb. A part of me has always held on to both descriptions, but I got in by going into admissions and giving them my transcripts, my unofficials. Since it wasn't my official transcript, I had to go to be advised on the classes that I should take that quarter. Anyway, I sat in front of my advisor and he or she, because I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot, went through my curriculum for graduation. So he or she or they, I'm not sure if that's necessary, but it helps to be gender neutral in telling the story, says, okay, math, check, science, check, cool. Looks like you got quite a bit of electives, awesome. And then he, she, they asked me, do you speak a language other than English? And I said, yes, I do. I speak Hawaiian. And he, she, they proceeded to ask this question, is that Samoan? And I sat there sort of stunned, like, you know when someone says something racist to you, but it's possible that they didn't mean for it to be racist, but it is, so you have half a second to consider your response. And you can either call them out for it and put them in their place, or you can suck it up and just swallow whatever dignity you have. So I tried to do what Jesus would do, and I told her the truth and let her figure it out on her own. I said, it's Hawaiian, and I ended it there. You see, what's fascinating to me is that in the sequel to Luke's gospel, Luke associates the Holy Spirit's presence with the ability to communicate in other languages. Because that's what tongues is. It's the ability to communicate the gospel and so people understand. And speaking multiple languages is a communication skill that allows us to spread the gospel even further. When we talk about community, when we talk about the Holy Spirit, we are gifted with the ability of communication. This is one aspect of community that is super important: language and communication. Yet over the course of colonial history, speaking multiple languages turned into something close to sinning, and cultures were almost wiped out because of colonial oppression on cultural practices. Today, more of us know better, but the gospel, as in those days, are fighting still for the right to be known not as the good news that destroys people, but rather one that embraces culture to communicate how Jesus is revealed to the world. A very similar experience of communication happens in Acts 17 with Paul, where he says, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." Paul is saying this in front of what's called the Areopagus. It was similar to what we know as Congress today. To get there, Paul went to each academic site and debated with them on religion. He was so provocative with this new idea of Jesus that he was sent to the political leaders of the city to share his ideas with them. What is often seen by preachers and commentators in this text is Paul practicing apologetics, which means Paul is defending Christ. Yet Paul is not practicing apologetics because he's not defending anything. He's actually offending the culture. Paul feels the need to provoke the idol worship, and this isn't wrong. What is wrong was the interpretation of this provocation by historical figures, because what this meant for many in history was for the gospel to provoke a one world order, one nation, one ownership, one language. Exploration turned into colonization, and colonization turned into cultural genocide, and in some cases, actual genocide. Yet Paul's provocation comes with one key element: immersion. You see, for Paul to be able to go into each academy debating with teachers and piquing the interest of the teachers to then send them in front of the political leaders of the Greek community, Paul had to both understand and speak their language. He had the ability to communicate with them because he was deeply immersed in their culture. That kind of immersion doesn't come from 1 or 2 days of living there. It doesn't even come with months. It comes with fully living in the heart of the city, studying, learning, and even laboring with them. With that immersion, Paul says this: "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious." This isn't a light statement. Paul means this. He knows their culture well enough to tell them what they are. But before he says anything provocative, notice what he's trying to do to communicate to them first. He's validating them. He's taking into account the things about their culture that's in line with his own belief in Jesus. You are very religious. The gospel likes religious people. It radiates religion. It does call for discipline. And it's after he validates them that he continues. I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. Again, notice the language. Paul isn't talking about the contrast of culture. He's talking about a God that can be known. He proceeds to talk about God, who God is, what God did, what God is planning for in the future. He's introducing the gospel to them, not despite the culture, but rather shedding more light on the culture they already have. This is the difference between the colonial gospel of manifest destiny and the plain, unadulterated gospel. The gospel is all about God being known to the culture through the culture. So culture always shifts through the gospel, but the gospel doesn't destroy culture, it clarifies it. And the culture is transformed into something new through the melting pot of the old culture and the Jesus culture. The use of culture to share Jesus is what turns the gospel into a movement. Kind of like this guy.
Now here you go again, you say you want your freedom. Well, who am I to keep you down? It's only right that you should play the way you feel it.
Who would have expected some cholo to be riding a skateboard, drinking cranberry juice, and listening to Fleetwood Mac? It was such a shock for people that Ocean Spray used it in their own ads to promote their product. In the process, an entire movement was created by the TikTok community, built from a Hispanic guy drinking an old person's drink and listening to the whitest songwriters. Community is birthed not by a people of uniformity, but a people united in diversity. Community is an immersion into each other's lives and learning how to communicate with each other. And that immersion is the Holy Spirit's power. So here's my challenge for you. In what ways are you rejecting the culture shock of another that's hindering your understanding of the other? In what ways have you resisted the care and love of someone different from you? And how can you make moves toward a true unity birthed by differences?